without further ado, I'll introduce Lucas Beenken to present on our first session here.
All right, good morning. And thank you for being here. I am aware that there might be some questions, and this is our gathering space to start to address some of those. So I'm Lucas Beenken with the ISAC Government Relations team and our staff lead on tax and finance issues. So I get this pleasure of not only following things through the legislative session, but then when they're good enough to attract 250 people, we get to have a further conversation. So a couple housekeeping things. As Amanda mentioned, we are recording, so microphones for questions, but I do highly encourage them. I don't think I have enough slides because I'm counting on you, and I know that you'll probably be able to help me out here, but counting on you with questions that we can address, because if you're thinking it, I'm guessing auditors and supervisors throughout the state have probably thought about it as well. The other part with the recording and the microphones, try and behave yourselves. I mean, this is going to be on the internet forever, right? So, again, questions, restroom breaks, refreshments, anything, just go ahead and do that at your own pace. We don't have a break scheduled until lunch, so you are on your own. It appears you're all adults, and I'm confident in your ability. Should we dive right in? So, we are gathered here today because our legislature passed House File 718. We knew, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we knew going into the session that it would be a property tax year, every indication. And it was a session-long conversation about what that might look like. And ultimately, we came up with something that, despite what you might think now, or even at the end of the day, I think it's something that's workable. And maybe the thing to remember is, and I mentioned this to the supervisor, some of you maybe just heard it 3 weeks ago, but home rule does not apply to tax and finance. So we can talk about local control, we can talk about county supervisors are elected to make budget decisions, levy rate decisions, right? But ultimately, the state does have that ability to go in and affect that. And so that's what we saw. And we've seen over the last number of years, the state doing what they can for the taxes that they control, right? We've seen income tax relief. So it did really appear going into this session that the legislature intended to say, okay, we've kind of taken care of some of our taxes. Let's maybe look at property tax. So we might not like that, but that's kind of the reality of the authority that they have. So jumping right in, just the key points of the law, and we're going to, of course, get into this in more detail, but a levy rate reduction is possible with certain valuation growth. This applies to your general basic and your rural basic levies. We'll go into more detail, but this does not affect supplemental. It does not affect any of your other levies except for general basic, rural basic. There are new exemptions. Many of you probably are aware of the 65 plus because we had a very quick implementation and July 1 deadline for those applications. But it's basically an expansion of the homestead credit, except it's an exemption and only for those 65 and older. An expanded exemption for military service. As you probably know, there's currently an exemption for veterans. This just increases the dollar amount that's exempt. The truth in taxation mailing, and this will be covered a lot more this afternoon with the Department of Management, but this is basically an additional mailing to taxpayers with certain budget information, tax rate information, and examples of what a property tax bill might look like. Certain population-based bonding thresholds increased by 30%. I think I'll denote that maybe this is the first piece of good news. This is something that ISAC has been working on for at least a decade on these thresholds that the dollar amounts are set in code and inflation not set in code. So those dollar amount thresholds not keeping up with the cost of providing service. So 30% increase there. and various other provisions, including fees at the county level. That's pretty much all I have. Any questions? All right. So as I said, following the elections, we started to get that first indication that, quote, it's going to be a property tax year, right? So you start hearing about the limitations, you start hearing the issues that some legislators have related to property tax. We saw several proposals throughout the year, and you're probably aware of this as you read our updates. They came early, they came throughout the session, and then the final few days is when House File 718 was finally passed. So where did we start? That was a fun one. Senate File 181, you might recall, dealt with the rollback for residential and multi-residential properties. So this was not on the plans for legislators to address property tax with a reduction in the taxable valuation for multi-residential and residential. But they realized there was a mistake that was made. The rollback percentage was about 2% higher than it should have been if calculated correctly. And y'all were right in the middle of setting your budgets. And it was affecting the budget that you were in the process of setting, right? Do we remember this, or we're blocking it out at this point? Okay. So that was the first little piece of property tax conversation, and I think it kind of set a certain tone for the legislative session in how certain groups, certain individuals handled this issue, because ultimately, if we're being completely honest, a mistake was made. It was not at the county level. It was not your fault, but you get to figure out how to deal with it. And I think the demeanor that you showed during that process went a long way for legislators to see, hey, if it's too high, then we're going to go lower, and we're going to charge people what they should be charged on the taxable valuation where it should be. And, counties are not, as far as I know, in the business of just collecting property tax to collect property tax, right? So I say all that to say, I think we set a tone with that first Senate File 181 on how we can address property tax as county elected and appointed officials. I did say appointed. I know we have one assessor that snuck in today. So the first proposal that came out of the House, House File 1, very, very intentional in how that's $1 for the jar. We are having a happy hour later. I'm kidding, I made that up. So House File 1 was very intentional, House File 1. So they wanted the first bill out to be property tax related. In my opinion, they could have come up with a better idea. This one was the assessment limitations by parcel. So I'm going to pause, give you a second to figure out how you would limit assessments by parcel. So right now, there's the growth limitation. So for residential, that 3% growth limitation, that drives your rollback up or down depending on what valuation growth is doing. This called for limiting the amount that an assessment could grow on an individual parcel on an annual basis. So administratively, nearly impossible, I think. And also, we have a property tax system that is completely based on, for residential anyway, figuring out the market value of property, and then, with the limitations that are in place, the growth limitations, the rollback, getting to a taxable valuation. So if you start limiting assessments by parcel, not taxable value, but the actual assessment, you throw the whole system into chaos. And for the one assessor, I'm not sure where she snuck off to, can we confirm that this is just really, really terrible? Okay, so from an expert, from an assessor, this would be terrible. So then at the same time, the Senate is also working on their proposals. And we did have a little more luck on the Senate side, just having those conversations about, we understand what you're trying to do. We understand the reality in this building, meaning the Capitol, and the majorities that you have, the trifecta, if you want to do something, you can do it, right? And you've probably heard me talk about this before. With the current numbers, if they want to do it, they can do it. So we had session-long conversation about how can we make this workable, as I mentioned before. And the Senate was better about having those conversations. Their first proposal was related to levy rate limits, and this was kind of the idea that ended up in House File 718 at the end of session. Although their original proposal was a lot more aggressive, and it also dealt with the bonding the opposite way, saying you need to go to voters more often if you want to take on indebtedness. Just a whole host of other issues that, again, not workable as we saw it. Or I shouldn't say alternatively, another proposal that would be a part of this if they could get it all done, but they didn't want one big bill, right? Are we tracking? Is, on the Senate side, dealing with the local option sales tax and the Outdoor Recreation Natural Resources Trust Fund, or the Iowa Water Land Legacy, dealing with rollbacks, dealing with exemptions. So basically what they are trying to do with this one is say we're no longer going to have a local option sales tax, but we're going to have that statewide penny still, and then we'll just give the money to the local governments that normally would have gotten the local option sales tax. And then they'll get an additional, in this proposal, an additional 40%, which would come down to 25% of an additional penny. So you're getting your 1 cent sales tax. That's no longer local option, but it would go to the locals. And then an additional 2/5 of a penny, and then down to 1/4 of a penny. So this would address diversification, bring in revenue from a different source, right, an additional sales tax. But what's the problem that we're seeing here? The state's going to get the money, and they promise they're going to give it to the locals. I think I've read that story somewhere else. So obviously, our members were concerned with this idea. And by the way, the conversion from local option sales tax to state sales tax that would be going to the locals is that would trigger the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund that was passed in 2010, that the next 3/8 of a penny increase in the sales tax goes to that fund. So this is a creative way to get there. The consumer would not see any additional charge when they're purchasing something, but the revenue would then be diverted differently. Now, beyond the promise, and we hope the state keeps it component, if they are in the process, as we know, decreasing income tax, keeping sales tax the same, but giving away 1/4 of a penny of that, where is that money coming from and how long does it last is the question that I'm left with. So that proposal will come up again next year, and we'll talk more later about what we might expect in future years, but I expect this to be a part of ongoing conversations, the local option sales tax piece and the Iowa Water and Land Legacy piece. And finally, the original House File 718 dealt with tax limitations per parcel. This was another absolutely unworkable idea. And so when I say unworkable, we're trying to differentiate between, okay, what don't we like because of the fiscal impact versus administratively, how in the world do we even make this happen? The latter is what I'm talking about with House File 1 and with the original House File 718, is how do you limit the taxes that each individual parcel pays? So if it's a 3% cap on that growth, then y'all are calling up your city council and your school board and your ISU extension and your community college and saying, how are we going to do this so that all of our collective levy rates can come together and make sure that no individual parcel exceeds 3%? So Enough on that. What we ended up with was a final compromise that dealt with mostly just the Senate File 356 stuff, with some ideas from the House, but basically it was a less aggressive version of what the Senate originally proposed. How are we doing so far? This is all just what we've gone through and not why you're here, but any questions so far? Anything confusing yet? Okay. Let's take a look at the landscape going into what legislators were thinking about. How are we doing on microphone? I know I keep kind of swaying away from it in the back. Are we doing okay on microphones? Thank you, Amanda. Camera, we're doing okay on sound? Very good. Louder, okay. I'm not getting shorter, so we'll see how much we can stretch the microphone. So, going into the session, what were we dealing with? What was the landscape of pre-legislation passing? So general basic, limited to 350. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Rural, 395. However, this is kind of what caught, yep, it is the second bullet point, sorry. This is kind of what caught legislators' attention. 350 is supposed to be a cap. We have 30 counties, nearly a third of the state, over what's supposed to be a cap. They started calling those 30 counties the Dirty 30 for some reason. If you want to adopt that, you can. But the issue was we have what's supposed to be a cap of 350, and a third of the counties are over that. Now, as you probably well know, the reasons for going over 350 are allowed in Iowa Code, were allowed in Iowa Code for specific reasons. So it was not limited to a dollar or cent amount, but limited to the use. So things like natural disaster, things like low or no valuation growth, new mandates from the state that you're trying to figure out how to pay for. So all of these things are legitimate reasons why 30 counties are over 350, so let me rephrase that because I don't know the individual circumstances of those 30 counties. Those reasons, in theory, could be good reasons for those 30 counties to be over 350, right? So the intent of the legislation is to bring those 30 counties back down to 350. Should we have a small contest? Who's over 425? Any county? Don't be shy. Okay. So how do you go from 425, 450, whatever it might be, to 350? Is it the natural disasters are going to stop? Your valuation growth is going to skyrocket all of a sudden. The mandates will go away. What else? You'll have just the right amount of people in your county for the services that you can provide, for the tax dollars you collect. I'm being sarcastic because those things are not going away, but what went away was your authority to add additions, come on, Lucas, for additions to the basic levy. So that code section was repealed. You can still go to the voters to get approval for certain things, to have an addition to your 350 or your 425 or whatever it might be. You can still go to your voters to get that approval. The timelines are smaller now, but that's one additional step that you'll have to take, not being able to do your additions to basic levies. Any counties lower than 350 currently? That was like really shy. It was like a slow hand raise. Okay, so yeah, and Dallas in the back, thank you. I'm a constituent, I appreciate it. Yes, so just a few counties that are under 350, and it's probably because they have, I'm guessing here, but they have the valuation to be able to do that, right? So what we're stuck with is legislators saying we shouldn't be over 350. Additionally, those remaining counties, why are you at 350 every year when you have property valuation growth? So shouldn't you be lowering the 350 to pass that on to the taxpayers if valuations go up? And of course, the other end of that conversation is there are so many costs that are out of your control that are increasing year over year that you're trying to figure out how to pay for. You know, the growth that's allowed now is barely, the growth that was previously allowed was barely enough to handle some of those increasing costs that are largely out of the control of the Board of Supervisors. But they continue to go up, so I don't agree with legislators that said all of these counties at 350, valuations increasing, they should be decreasing that levy rate. But that's kind of, I'm just trying to give you some of the thought of some legislators in this ongoing conversation. So they want to make the 350 an actual hard cap. And we'll get into kind of more detail on this, but as you might recall, 4-year timeline on this language. I don't think many counties that are in that $3.75 to $4 to $4.25, you're not getting to 350 in 4 years. It would be, first, it would be impossible. And second, what would your constituents say when you're getting rid of, what, a quarter of your levy authority and the revenue that it generates? Okay, I did mention this, session-long conversation, just one opposing vote. I did want to discuss that because you probably are discussing this, have or will discuss this with your legislators. I don't think most of your legislators can fully understand and fully explain what they voted for and what this is doing. I do this every day and I can barely do it, as you can tell. You do it every day and you still showed up to see what I was going to say today. So, but my point is, there's not that full understanding of what this actually does. It's simply, hey, we're going to put limits on property tax increases. It's a pretty easy yes vote, right? And that's why I'm telling you this, is your legislator might not know exactly how this works, but they know what its intent is. And that's a really easy yes vote. I mean, it would be silly, you know, we talked before about the margins of the majority. It would be kind of silly for anyone in either party to vote no the way that this took place, I guess is my point. So it was signed in May. Various effective dates, we'll kind of get into that more, and I know this afternoon the Department of Management will talk more about those specific timelines because that's more of the administrative side. You've already seen this slide, but just another recap, the key provisions, you're dealing with levies, you're dealing with loss of taxable valuation because of exemptions, the additional mailing, the bonding thresholds. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned this before, but the bonding, and I think this might be on a later slide actually, but the bonding has to be done in November now. So you probably may have heard, I guess, of different jurisdictions that were kind of thinking about putting a bond question on, maybe a special election this year in September, as an example. Those would have to be moved, so they're always in November. An earlier proposal actually said general election, so just even years that this could be on the ballot. Ongoing conversations did get that changed, that it can be done every year. The issue that you're going to see is now all jurisdictions are asking at the same time. So just something to be aware of. All right, I think we're getting close to why you all came. Let's talk first about how the levy rate limitation might just work. So as you know, there's currently, or previously and currently, the old law, and it remains, the growth limitation statewide, right, of 3%. This is for residential. Over that, and your rollback gets driven down. Now, this is another 3%. Just to make sure that you're paying attention a little bit, they're using 3% for this as well. So if your taxable valuation grows more than 3%, your levy rate is driven down with the calculation that they came up with. So this kind of gets at that, that thought that we talked about earlier with, if you have valuations increasing and you keep your levy rate the same, you're going to generate more tax dollars. And the thought is the thought that I am not on board with, but I'm telling you, is, well, why wouldn't you just decrease the levy rate and bring in less revenue if your valuations go up, right? So that's what they're attempting to do with the calculation. So if you're over that 3% growth, you're going to take your current fiscal year actual property tax dollars. So that is, so I'm going to use general basic as the example. And by the way, if you are taking photos of the slides, that is perfectly fine. They will also be available, but I know you have big weekend plans and you didn't want to wait for the slides to be posted online. You want to review them the next couple days. So your current fiscal year tax dollars, so your 350 times your taxable valuation gets your dollars, right? And that's for your certified levy, divided by 102% of your taxable valuation multiplied by 1,000. So you're growing over 3%, you're dividing by 102%. So you still are getting growth, you're not getting the full amount. Is this making sense? So you're growing 3, dividing by 2, okay. And I do say this kind of shorthand, so if I'm like really confusing you by saying 103% sometimes and growing 3% a different time, and please stop me and I'll try and correct myself. Anybody's growth over 6% in recent memory, taxable valuation growth? Again, Dallas County. I see what you guys are doing out there. Okay, so we have one example. So for today, we're just going to stick to the 3%, assuming that, and I think I'm correct, that most counties are growing between 0 and 6%. Does anyone know, is that a question or can I have you come up to the microphone, Kathy? Or if you can, yeah, let's not set a precedent. I was going to say I can re-ask it, but let's just get everyone on the mic.
Can you touch on what's included in valuation growth? Is that new construction and that kind of stuff?
Good question. So the question was on what's all included in the valuation growth. My understanding is that it is all the valuation growth, and the 2% is supposed to, let me make sure I'm wording this right. The 2% is supposed to capture any new construction. Is this making sense? And Jared, do you have any more information? I know this was like an ongoing conversation about new construction and how that was going to be. I'm putting you on the spot since you kept raising your hand with valuation. Okay, so and I'm sorry for kind of going rogue here, but asking Dallas County because Jared and others from Dallas County are on the working group that Amanda mentioned that Carla and I are also sitting on. So new construction not included, the 2% is supposed to capture that in theory. How it actually works, we probably don't know yet. But that was an ongoing conversation, and it might be as we move forward, and I mentioned this earlier, there's going to be ongoing conversations about property tax, at least over the next few years. So the new construction piece might be a part of that. And I mean, if you think about it, if you're a county that has a bunch of new valuation, you're probably, and it's because of new construction, the county, the city, the school district, all facing increasing costs of providing the services that whoever's building is going to be expecting, right? So, okay, so I think.
Kind of just elaborate on that just a little bit. I thought it was loud. Sorry, I'm not as tall as he is. To kind of elaborate on that, eventually the auditors will be responsible for submitting the assessor's, continuation of the assessor's recon report, which will show that what is new construction versus what is just revalued. That is coming in '24. So we will see that, and I think that's part of what the legislature wants to look at to see if they need to do some more tweaking to the already large language that they've passed.
Yes, that's a great point, and thank you. So there will be a report from the auditors differentiating, and I agree, Carla. I think the legislature uses that in those ongoing, in the out years, figuring out how changes in the future might look and how new construction might be playing into that. Thank you. Okay, and the final point here, and I'll probably continue to say this, because I want, when you're talking to your constituents or your legislators, I want to make sure that we're on the same page. Your property tax revenue under the machinations of the bill will not produce less revenue than the previous year. It will produce less revenue than if the legislature didn't do anything. So I call it a reduction in future revenue increases. Is this part making sense? In 2 slides, it'll make a lot more sense. That's a preview. All right, continuing on. Limits and levy rate calculations effective for fiscal year 25. So this will be your budgets that you're setting next year. And as I mentioned before, it's just 4 years. So we know the legislature has to go back in and continue to deal with this. All right, bullet point number 2 is usually the happy news one, if you recall from earlier. So here's a happy news one, kind of. If your valuation growth is less than 3%, you're not affected by the calculation in this legislation. So that 3% threshold, and we will see on the next slide how this might work. So I say it's good news because you're not seeing the reduction by the calculation. It's not perfect news because your growth isn't greater than 3%, right? So, and one final, one thing that we saw with Senate File 181, because you were working on the budgets that would affect with the rollback for residential and multi-residential, the certification deadlines were moved to April 30th, this past April 30th. So that led to conversations about the deadlines moving forward. And so seeing that everything on the other side of April 30th, past April 30th, could be done, and looking at all the additional requirements that counties and others will have to adhere to here, they decided to move to April 30th moving forward for all jurisdictions. Okay, here's one I kept previewing. So is that big enough that everyone can kind of see? And I will explain this because it is not showing exactly how the calculations were done. But what I wanted to do, yes, please.
Can
Amanda?
I ask a question on that last slide?
Yes, please. And can you do, Kathy, I didn't make you do this, but name and county, Amanda.
Amanda Harlan, Monroe County. So that second bullet point, if taxable valuation growth does not exceed 3, does that mean overall, like I do my valuation, there's 3%, less than 3%, I continue on? Or is it per parcel? Do you break it down that far? Or are we just looking at a 3 average, move on?
Yep, 3% taxable valuation countywide.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what I have tried to do here is looking at different growth levels and what the calculation might do, or I guess would do. So you can see just 2.5 to 6.5, so that very bottom one will be dividing by 103%. The 3.5, 4.5, 5.5 dividing by 102%, and that first one at 2.5, less than the 3% threshold, so it won't have the calculation down. So what are we seeing? The county that was at 2.5% growth brings in more revenue than the county that was at 3.5% growth. And 6.5 dividing by 103 instead takes that less than the 5.5 that's dividing by 102. Has everyone seen this, or am I just kind of speaking into the recording? Okay, so the calculated levy rate, again, is you're taking your 102% of your valuation is your allowable growth, right? And you're taking last year's tax dollars. And what the calculation does for those three that are dividing by 102, you're dividing the same numbers, right? So that drives that levy rate from 350 down to 343. And for that county that's at 6.5%, they're seeing that drive down to $3.40. Have I completely lost everyone or most? Or what questions jump out?
So
Denise?
this is a new realization for me. So even if, say we're at 385, but say we get down to 350 on year 2, we continue to go lower than that. I mean, if you're at 350, you go lower. If your growth is, okay. I thought they just wanted everybody at 350. And
Yes.
that they want us lower if it can be possible. Okay.
So the question is basically what happens after year 1? Is that, or after you get below 350? So for those applicable years, so it's through fiscal year 28, 350 is no longer the cap. Your cap is whatever is calculated in the legislation, using the legislation. So county number, well, I guess there's 3 of them. Those counties that get driven down to 343, that's their new 350. That's their cap now. You can go less than that. Wouldn't advise it based on how the legislation will work in the out years, but that's your new cap. Now, what's one thing that relies on the general basic cap?
What happens to
Supplemental. So after you get to 343 in this example, then you can go over to supplemental for the uses that are allowed in Iowa code.
They're not tied anymore.
Okay, we got some grumbling. That's good. People are talking to their neighbor. Okay, so what are we discovering? Questions, comments, concerns at this time? Your assessor and auditor, you might be the auditor, have the information available to run these calculations in your county now for next year. Ballpark, right? So we don't have all the valuations finalized, would have to ballpark the rollback, but with the information that's available now, you can start to look at approximately what will happen to your levy rate and then start to figure out, Becky, I will
You're good.
get there, and then start to figure out, look at column 4, or column 3 and 4. Looking at that difference between the revenue brought in under the bill versus if it didn't exist and you just kept your 350, what revenue would have been brought in. And if you want to go, I guess, yeah. So you can compare the two to see that, again, what I call the reduction in revenue increases. Eric, are you shaking? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? You have judgy eyes. I'm not sure who you're judging. Okay. Yeah, that's a great time for a reminder. I didn't vote for this. We have to protect our messenger, folks. So the other thing that you look at beyond the difference, which is that last column there, so you bring in 71,000 less, or I guess in the big case, 108,000 less. What you also should look at is year over year, you're going from that 3.5 million to 3.587, 3.551, right? So I'm demonstrating the increase year over year, but less than if the legislation was not passed. Are we checking out on that? Okay. Becky, please. Name, county, question.
Becky Vissel, Adams County Auditor. Okay, so I've got multiple questions.
Please.
So the entire taxable valuation is all of your classes, right? Okay,
Yes.
so I just wanted to verify that. So if we see growth in our TIFs, which is typically substantial, or I guess growth in our wind turbines, then it's substantial growth. And then we're going to always be behind then. We're always going to have until they level off, right? Does that make sense? No?
It does not yet, but if you keep asking.
Okay. Maybe I'll ask that one later.
I thought Amanda said there wouldn't be any TIF questions, so.
Yeah, so we, as a county, TIF'd some wind turbines.
Yep.
Does it affect that? Are we limited on how much we can capture each year on that?
I'm going to come back to that because I
Okay.
think I wrote an email about this, and I think
Okay.
you may have been one of the recipients, and I
But
may
I'm
know
still
more than that.
confused.
Okay. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
So we're going to circle back to TIF
Okay, I've got more.
after I have a chance to take a look at it.
Oh shoot, Danny, what was my other one? Yeah, so the things that we can put in general supplemental, that didn't change, right?
That's correct. So the question was supplemental. Is there any change to supplemental? There was not. So in some of the early proposals, there was, I don't think this made it to a bill, but there was talk about consolidating, because that's what happened with the cities. A lot of their levies were consolidated. So we're keeping supplemental separate. And as you know, the uses are laid out in code, not limited by as I said earlier, the dollars and cents, but rather limited by the use. So those things that are in, 331, 426, elections, you guys ever do elections? Insurance, benefits, those sorts of things. And honestly, a lot of those costs that we talk about that are uncontrollable for county supervisors and others, like insurance, can go into supplemental, so we're not dealing with.
So is
An
the
issue there.
3% growth also, does that include utilities, or is it just on property tax dollars?
Very good question. Does it include utilities or just property tax dollars? That is a wonderful question for the Department of Management this afternoon.
Okay.
I don't have that answer, but I suspect that they will. Otherwise, Adam, do you have that question? We'll follow up on both of those. How about
I
a
feel like I
hand
have
for
more,
Becky?
but-
2 stumpers right off the bat. That's pretty good.
Since you can't answer anything, I'll sit down, but.
How about, you could give me one more try.
Hi, Rhonda Betzworth, Lynn County. I just wanted to point out, because our finance director has mentioned this, that we're looking for 2.99% growth, because in your example, it would put us at 3.6 million, which is right between 4.5% and 5.5%. So it might be interesting for you to include that on your slide if you share it anywhere else. But
To include getting even closer?
yeah, like if you have 2.9% on your slide there.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So I just find that interesting that that's our magic number we're shooting for.
Are you referring to Dawn?
Yes.
So Dawn was on a panel, and supervisors in the room maybe saw her last month at our annual conference, and she did mention, I said, that is perfect. So if you guys have any control over valuations, try and get like that 2.9% to capture without the calculation kicking in. I need to maybe just pause real quick to say something I said earlier, which is, I know you guys aren't in the business of just trying to collect as much in property tax dollars as you can. That's not why you do your job, right? But, again, as we talked about, you do have services to pay for that your constituents depend on and desire. And so how do you pay for that? And the one thing that you can control, supervisors, is your levy rate. Kind of control, jeez. Right, because, property tax is the revenue stream that you have a little control over. So that's kind of where we are. Name, county?
Jerry Clobernance, Hamilton County. Question I have is, you're below 350, and you have an increase of 105%. Do you still have to reduce your levy? So, for example, you have up there, if I'm at 340, but our county has a growth of 106%. Do I have to go back in and reduce the levy? because we were at 106% increase?
Growth. We're not in agreement up here.
Stop them.
Now, the news on that is there's only a few counties that it would affect, and those counties have been lowering their levy rate, obviously, if they're below 350. So I have confidence in them to figure it out.
Although it'll affect everybody at 350, will be the second year, now going to be less than 350 for most everybody. So they will affect them the second year.
Okay, so kind of, and Carla, just give me the cane if I go too wild here. So the question from Ben was, or the comment was, after year one. So the calculation is only dealing with certified property taxes from current fiscal year and valuation for the budget that you're working, the valuation dollars that you're working for the budget that you're working on, okay? So where does the 343 come in? In calculating out that the revenue coming in is 3.622. So then in the second year, when you're using 3.622 I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong column. You're using 3.551 in column 3 instead of 3.622. So what I'm saying is that the impact is of that 343 of the calculation down, the impact is seen in the second year when you're looking at the property tax dollars that were brought in because that was based on the 343. Let me stop there. Have I lost you? Okay, let me think of a quick way to say this a different way. So the levy rate, so the 343 is not set. So we talked about how your 350 is your limit, how your 343 becomes your new limit. Yes? In year two, that 343 doesn't exist in trying to figure out the calculation because you're dealing with, did my valuation growth go over 3%? And if so, I'm dividing by that 102% of the valuation, right? But using last year's certified property tax dollars, and I think I'm maybe bringing some of you along. How did you get to last year's property tax dollars? Using 343. Okay. Did I do better that time? Are we starting to? So that's how it's baked in there, but the 343 is not your new limit in year two. Because you calculate it one-offs. Every year you calculate it.
But completely understand what he's saying is that if you have growth every year, most likely you're going to see that 343 ratchet down further, right? It's not going to go back up to 3.5 unless you have had some type of no growth year. Then you could see it go back up to 3.5. But most likely, most of us have seen, increases in valuation, not all, some, most. You could see that keep ratcheting down over time. So that's what Ben was trying to get at.
Becky Bissell, Adams County again. So the days of the board setting a levy rate and coming up with this is how much dollars you have to use is gone. Is that correct?
You remember the recording part, right? I'm not going to confirm that
Okay.
some counties were doing that.
Because to me, it's all working backwards. It's all working completely different, and I'm just trying to figure out how to implement it, which obviously you're not going to be able to explain, but I'm just wondering if I'm thinking about it incorrectly, and I need to switch gears from that. But they would say, okay, here's my budget that I have. We need $1 million, let's say, and if we set the levy rate at this, then that covers that $1 million, or we need to lower our expenses or somehow figure out more revenue, or we're going to have to raise our levy rate, right? So now we can't think that way anymore, essentially. They're telling us this is the pot you have to figure it out. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So who and at what time are they going to give us, this is your pot to figure out? I mean, I'm coming up with that number on my own? After valuations are certified? They think I'm a lot smarter than that, huh?
So, the last question being, when do you run these calculations? As I said, you could be doing that now. So the rollback is what you don't know right now. So early indications put it in maybe the 48% range. You could do 50%. You're going to get in the ballpark, right? So just guesstimate the rollback. I do want to comment on the mentality shift. So right now, or previously, if your budget process was 350 is our max, I'm going to state it a different way than you did. Maybe supervisors are thinking 350 is our max, valuation growth of a couple percent, and this is before we're worried about the threshold, right? Run the calculation. How do I provide the services that my constituents are depending on with this amount of money? As opposed to, I think the way maybe Becky, the way I heard it was, well, 350 will give us this much. How do we spend that? Let's figure out how much fun we can have, right? So the point being, yes, there were counties that previously would say, how do we make our budget work with the dollars that are generated with the 350? And is that too much? Can we go less than 350? Now, I'm not suggesting that obviously the very large majority of counties that are at 350 or higher, I'm not saying that they're not looking at those opportunities, but valuation growth probably isn't there. Costs are probably increasing. All these, I'm not telling you anything y'all don't know, right? So let me stop there. Eric, please.
Yeah, let me help you pull you out of that water, Lucas, a little bit. Eric Van Lanker, Clinton County Auditor. Is this not on? Just talk louder. Oh, talk louder. No one's ever said that to me. Carla, I want to follow up on something you had mentioned. What I heard is that we get down to, say, year 2 or 3, we get to that 343, and then we have zero growth, that then we could increase our tax levy back to 350. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
Then you're dealing with tax dollars. The way the legislation is written, it isn't looking at levy rates. It's looking at property tax dollars. It's letting those property tax dollars grow by 3%. See what I mean? And this is where this is where Lucas and I kind of disagreed. I think
we were talking about valuations, I thought.
Well, you are, but valuations and levy rates make property tax dollars. So they're looking at your growth. They're not. You don't really worry about your levy rate until you figure out what your growth is. So if your growth can grow by that 3%, as long as if you're under that 3%. If you get over the 3%, that's when they make you do the calculations.
So if we have a
So if you have no growth between your years, you haven't grown 3%. So then you can use your actual taxable value, which then would give you.
We can increase our revenue by 3% by adjusting our tax levy up at that point.
You could go up to the 3.5, yes, as long as your growth wasn't
revenue
over.
doesn't go over 3% from the previous year. That's what you're saying.
As long as the growth in your value isn't over that 3% total value. Does that make sense?
I mean, mildly, yes. Yeah.
Now, I have not run the numbers on this, but if you went down to, let's just keep using the example, 343, and then had 0% growth, as I said with Ben's question or comment, if you're using that 343 is already baked into getting to your tax dollars. So I'm not sure if 0% growth would, if you ran that calculation, if you'd be, I mean, you'd go back up, but I don't think you would get back to 350.
Exactly.
But you would have the
You
ability.
could go back, you can't go back, you can't go more than 350.
Correct.
If that 3% takes you to 352, you're topped out at 350.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And for those counties that continue to see, and I did mention this, but if you get to 343, that's your new limit. You don't get to say, oh, then we now have the ability to go up to 350 from 343. And that was kind of an ongoing conversation session long as well, is once you go below, then can you go back to 350? And the way that that's addressed, again, is this is only a 4-year process as it's written, and the intention is to get every county to 350 or below. Again, it's not going to happen in 4 years for those counties that are a lot higher than 350. But the intent, I guess, is to revisit and then figure out those counties that are in 4 years below 350, can they now go back up to 350? And the way it's written now, if nothing else happened, they could at that point. Yes, Tom, please.
Tom Schultz from Lee County, and I guess we're famously, or maybe infamously, one of those 30 counties that's above the 350 rate now. So are we running on the baseline of our current revenue when we go into these calculations, or are we going to get driven down based on these same formulations? So what's our baseline for our calculation, I guess, is my question.
Yes. So is your question because you're one of the counties over 350? Yes. Is that the, okay. So over 350, it'll work the same way, but that 343 might look like 423. Or, you know, depending on where you start, right? Fiscal year 24 will be your base year. So, and just I guess a quick aside, legislators kind of know the timeline, and also that y'all are pretty smart, right? So let's imagine if they said 25 is the base year, but they passed it this year. Don't you think you would probably be doing some things to kind of manipulate that base year, right? So they knew what they were doing. They set the base year for something that you've already passed. And then going forward, the calculations will be run. Yeah.
But, yes, but by 29, I mean, it doesn't matter, us over 350, we use this formula, tick down, but at 29, it's 350. Like, it doesn't matter how close we are, that 29 budget is at 350, right?
Yes. So the question was from the non-microphone rule breaker.
Because we can't take 10 years to get down to 350.
So the question from Eric Van Lanker, Clinton County Auditor, was the way that it is currently written, 350 is the hard cap after 4 years. If you're at 450 right now, and this calculation gets you to, let's say, 440, because, I mean, it's not going to drive down as quick as you might think. So now, if they do nothing, you go from 440 to 350 in 1 year. That's what, yes, that's what would happen. I'm confident that something will happen between now and then legislatively, but yes, that is the way that it would work. Grant?
Grant Veeder, Blackhawk County Auditor. I'm trying to puzzle out the supplemental fund. So I guess if I understand correctly, those counties that are above the 350 max for general basic are maxed out in their supplemental fund. Is that not correct? Okay, it's not correct, but I'm going to make another assumption. I'm going to guess that most of the counties that are right at their 350 max play this game every year when their valuation changes, where they're shifting things between general basic and general supplemental, because you have to keep that 350 figure exactly at 350. And so some of your expenses that are some years are going to be in general basic are going to end up in general supplemental because they qualify for that. So when we get to the hypothetical $3.43, that's still going to happen, right? Counties are, it's not just going to be, well, we're stuck at 343. There's still going to be some interplay between basic and supplemental, right?
That's correct. So supplemental, unchanged. It's still those items that are specifically listed, not limited by the levy rate, but limited by those specific uses. And your question was that interplay between how much capacity do we have under general basic, 350, and what's allowed under supplemental. Was your question, you said maxed out supplemental. By that, did you mean have they put everything that they possibly could put that can go under supplemental is already there? Is that what you meant by maxed out?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of my question. If you're above the 350, then you must not have been able to move any things to supplemental, or, well, anyway, people can explain that to me of why that doesn't work out. Well, or you can, Lucas. Go ahead.
I liked the somebody.
Here comes
The somebody idea before the specific Lucas idea, but let me have you ask that a different way, Grant. What are they trying to figure out? Or are you just acknowledging that every year this is going to be?
We don't have to answer that question anymore. It's not really germane. We can talk about it later.
Okay. Becky.
Okay, so are you going to go to rural basic? Does the same thing apply to rural basic? And so if I'm not at my 395, can I move? Does it matter if I move stuff from general basic to rural to get me to that 395? I'm still limited by the growth.
So I don't have a slide on 395. It will work very similar to the way 350 does for general basic. So 395 is the cap. There aren't that many counties that are actually at the 395 cap, if I'm recalling correctly, but it'll drive down if they are at the cap. And just as the 350 or the new calculation became the new limit for supplemental, it'll work the same for your rural basic and rural supplemental. Is once you get to 395, then you can go over to supplemental, but if it's driven down, then that's your new cap. The other thing to maybe keep in mind is your road use tax fund dollars. So your transfer from your rural fund to your secondary road fund needs to be, 75% of the available capacity to get your full funding for road use tax fund. So I say that to say you should be able to get it still, but the limit might be lower if your 395 is driven down. Did that get close to, did I show improvement over the punting that I did on your last two questions?
Okay, so bear with me, and I'm sorry, everybody, that I might just be really slow here. They're going after the taxable valuation growth, not the revenue growth.
The 3% comes from, the 3% threshold is your taxable valuation, but as Carla said, what they're really trying to do is less, the way the calculation works, less revenue, and then the last piece of that equation is figuring out, 343. So the last piece is figuring out what the levy rate is to bring in the dollars that you're allowed based on how much your valuation grew.
Okay.
So they can't limit your taxable value because rollbacks are there, right? So because rollbacks are already there, your taxable value is your taxable value, unless TIF, and this is where maybe we disagree, TIF affects that taxable value, but your taxable value is what it is. So they can't limit your taxable value, so they're limiting your ability to levy on that value. That's why they're ratcheting down that levy on that fund. And they're not affecting it used to be the supplemental funds were tied to your general fund. If you were at 3.5 or you were below 3.5, I guarantee that Dallas County doesn't have a general supplemental fund. They're below 3.5. That's the way it used to work. It doesn't work that way anymore. Even though they're not tied anymore. So they're separate. So that levy rate on your general fund can ratchet down based on these calculations, but it doesn't affect what you levy in your supplemental. So what they were saying is if there's things that you have in your general fund that could be paid by supplemental, you can move those over. If you've already moved them all over, then that's where it becomes difficult. That's where those difficult situations and conversations are going to happen between the auditor and the supervisors, if that makes sense.
So one thing that was mentioned by Grant that maybe, I know we haven't talked about it, and maybe you haven't thought about it, is beyond that interplay of your general basic, general supplemental, same thing on rural, trying to figure out what could fit under supplemental. Grant mentioned the play between your county-wide and your rural, or your general basic and rural basic, meaning can you identify things that you could make the case that they're primarily servicing the rural constituents, so you could move it from general to rural. Another thing to be thinking about. Another question, please.
Lucas, Kisha Johnner, Marion County Board of Supervisor. Just wanting to make sure I understand fully. So the 350 to 343, that is set for us. There is no variance in that, in there between the 350, 343 to 340. There's no variance at all. And if there is no variance, how was that calculated? Do you have any idea?
Can I have you ask that very last, do I have any idea? Can you ask that a different way? Meaning, I guess I'm not understanding what you mean by variance.
I understand why they're all 343.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the
So
350 to 3, yeah.
Yep, okay. So, and I apologize, I should have just put all, Excel, right? I should have put out all the calculations that were going on in the background here. But for those that 350, 450, and 550, you're assuming, so you know the growth, but that's not a part of the calculation. So what you know is the 3.5 million at the very top, that was current year property tax dollars. What you also know is you're allowed the 2% growth. So all three of those that are the same 343 is because you're dividing by the same 102%.
Okay.
And then the differences come in the fourth column when you're taking the same 343 for all of them, but you've got your different valuations because of the different growth.
So this is just an example.
This is
Great.
just an example.
That's what I just wanted to make sure and
Yep,
clarify.
yep.
Thank you.
But this is how, that's how you would do it when you get the numbers from your assessor and auditor is, it's pretty simple math once you figure out what numbers you need to plug in, right? Not unlike the whole property tax system. Please.
Kathy Summers, Cass County Auditor. Okay, I have a question and a comment. The question is just to confirm, louder? Just to confirm that the supplemental, if somebody is reduced to the levy rate of 343, they can still use their supplemental as if they were at the 3.5, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, if I'm understanding correctly, they're trying to look at the taxable valuation, but the counties who are in these dirty 30, they're
See,
the ones.
it's catching on.
Yeah, they're the ones who need the growth in order to get their rate down to 350. But they're going to turn around and be penalized for the growth. And the counties who have the growth are not going to be able to pay for their services that are out of control. So the whole thing is not going to work.
So funny thing, in 2024, there's legislative races, probably in your district. No, could not have said it better. I mean, is that not what we've identified, though? Those counties that you're targeting to try and get back to 350, and this is how I started. Why are they over 350?
So
And
I'd like
what's
to
going to
address that.
change to, please, you get it. Go ahead.
I'd like to address that and
Name and
piggyback
county.
on Michelle Dooley, auditor for Wayne County. So approximately 6 years ago, the auditor's office and the supervisors said that we're going to follow the hard cap of 3.5. And we took a lot of criticism that year because we were following that, and everyone thought for sure that Wayne County would be bankrupt by the end of the year. And we did not have to take out any loans or anything else. However, that made a lot of people uncomfortable when we followed that levy cap. And so after that, we went back to being over 3.5 because I didn't want it on our office that the county went bankrupt or had to go take out money. So now
Doesn't
I'm
look
thankful that when and if we might fall on financial hardship, that it'll be the state's fault. So.
Now, I know that everyone here probably has somewhat of a relationship with their local newspaper given your job, so yeah, maybe they'd like to know about that. Eric?
I think that's a great time to follow up on something I've been preaching for a while since they started talking about this formula. And there's, to me, the base, the fatal flaw in this is this base concept that you were just talking about, the 350. And Lucas didn't have it when he had a whole slide of 350 limit. When was that 350 set? All right, I was just starting high school, taking my girlfriend Michelle to see The Breakfast Club at the mall. Mid-'80s, gang. There's a bunch of people in here who weren't even born then. Hi, Becky. So to me, that's the fundamental, like, I could almost buy this formula, kind of, but its very flaw is its base. If you put that 350 in a calculator, an inflation calculator, that's now almost $9. And I know most of you in this room aren't seeing growth that makes that 350 $9 ever. That's the first flaw with this, and I've tried to tell legislators that. In fact, several years ago, Amanda Waskey and I from Ringgold County put together a bunch of numbers, and we were trying to go to the legislature and say, hey, you know, the reason why you have, and at that time, by the way, I think the number of counties over 350 was almost 40. And we were trying to tell them part of that reason is because you gave us a cap that's been, you know, set before I graduated high school. Just a statement. Thanks.
Thank you. Now should I be the devil's advocate after he gets a round of applause is the question. I'll wait until he stops harassing people. So the devil's advocate, and you got applause, so I'm kind of hesitant to say this, but your evaluation growth mixed with a set 350, like you're supposed to capture the growth over those years so you don't have to go to 9 with the rate because the valuation is growing, but we're now seeing what happens if the valuation is growing. And by the way, not growing at market value, I mean, you're already limited to your 3%, and this is, of course, residential, as I continue to say, but you're already limited to 3% statewide. You're already, you know, running the calculations to get to a rollback that was, what, 54%? We're expecting it to go under 50%. So I agree with you, except for the levy rate probably doesn't need to go higher if the limited growth can be captured. But that gets back to, do we not have growth? Yeah. Please.
Nan Benson, Marshall County Auditor, Recorder, because it's fun to do both.
You bet.
One thing that I've only been around for 7 years, but one of the things that's a bit flawed is all of the things that the counties have to pay for the state. And we all know that those things, prices are going down in everything we pay. Oh, wait, they're not. And, you know, mental health, HHS, you know, some of the things that are allowed in supplemental, great. We are not maxed out in our supplemental, so we have we are one of the dirty 30. But maybe we've got some ways we can move some stuff around. But we still have some fundamental issues with all the things the states keep shifting to us, and that doesn't seem like that's changing or them recognizing that. So I'm new, but that is my first vision. I've also, you know, homestead exemption. It's cool. That's great. Oh, wait, we're not going to fund that.
So I think that's a couple slides away, but we will get to the exemptions. But your point is very well taken, and this is something that we continue to have the conversations. So they are aware that we've got expenses that are sometimes out of county control. So that could be, as we talked about earlier, it could be insurance. But it could also be those unfunded, underfunded mandates that come down from the state. We also talked about the property tax being the one thing that supervisors can really control, because with the limitations, thank you, they can play with the levy rate a little bit, right? They can't mess with road use tax fund. They can't mess with the local, or the local option sales tax rate. So we do continue to have those conversations about figuring out how to bring costs down if they're not within county control, and how do we diversify revenue. So I see those as the two remaining legs of the stool. The one that is firmly planted is the limitation on the property tax side. Does that make sense? So it's an ongoing conversation. There is a slide later, so we'll dive into that a little bit more. Please.
Doreen Pliner, Webster County Auditor. Was their intent to keep us at a 3% growth each year or not?
So I won't speak to intention on that issue because I don't know.
Okay.
There's already the 3% growth
Limit.
statewide, and then there's the calculation to drive the levy rate down if that growth is still somehow exceeding the limit it already has. So a certain percentage in mind, I don't know.
Okay.
But I think what they've created here is, again, multiple tiers of limitations, statewide and countywide, and then trying to drive levy rates down. But but they also allowed for the growth, or a little bit of growth, right? By dividing by 102, when you're growing 3, you get a little there. So I'm not sure if they have a certain percentage in mind that they wanted to limit to, or if they're just trying to figure out how can we start to drive those levy rates down.
Well, the reason I ask is when, I guess I want to know what their logic was when you go from a growth of 3.5%, but your actual gain is only 2% in your valuations that year, or 2% of growth in your taxable value. So why is it okay to reduce us below 3% when we're limited to the $3.50? Was there any discussion on why it's okay to reduce us to less than 3%? What their purpose was for that? Because we all know what inflation's doing. We all know what, I mean, $3.50, you know, back, like Eric said, back in the 80s, milk was probably 50 cents, and now it's up to what, $2.50, $3. So there's been growth, there's been inflation, and I just don't understand why, if you have a greater growth, you have to go less than 3%. That was my,
Yeah, and I think it really does come back to that intention to get everyone at a hard cap of 350.
Yep.
And this is that first attempt at trying to drive it down, but as we've said over and over, for a lot of these counties, I mean, you could spread it out over 30 years, and I don't know if it would drive it down enough.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
get it. I don't understand why we have to be below a 3%. Why can't they have a cap if they don't want us to grow more than that, or keep us at the 350, $3.50, you know, per $1,000? Why are they changing it to dropping it lower? That's what I get. I don't get it.
Yeah, so I guess to say it a different way, I think for these 4 years, it's going to be more of a limit because of what they're trying to accomplish with it, rather than, as an example, every year they vote on allowable growth for schools, right?
Right.
So, you know, with the number that they set there, with the targets that the governor puts out for state agencies, all of these things, those percentages are, I believe, lower than some of what they saw in local government growth, and that's why they're trying to address
Well,
property tax now.
And maybe the whole solution is to just allow more levies, like the EMS and the EMAs and all that. I mean, if that's what they want to do,
Oh,
then
boy.
they can leave us out of this.
We have had conversations about different levies, dedicated levies, and we'll probably continue, but I don't know that the legislature's very interested. Please.
Kelly Jepson, Pocahontas County Auditor. So now I understand it that general basic, general supplement are no longer connected, because it used to be that you have to hit the 350 before you could go into general supplement. So the majority of us are not into our rural supplement. So does that mean that we can pull things from our rural basic and put them into rural supplement now?
Good question. So this is back to that interplay between your basic funds, your supplemental funds, your basic and supplemental, rural and countywide. You get it. So now I lost myself on the question. So hitting the limits is still necessary. So if your 350 gets driven down, let's use the same old example, 343 is your new limit for when you can go over to supplemental. The same would apply for rural basic and rural supplemental. If you get to the 395, you can go over into supplemental, or if you're one of those few counties that's already maxed out and it gets driven down because you're over 3% growth, then you would be able to go over to supplemental with your new rate that's established by the calculation. Dave.
Lucas. Dave Mobar, Crawford County. Could you walk me through a little bit about how TIF could be beneficial or maybe not beneficial to taxable valuations? And maybe just my elementary thing. Let's say if 2.9 in growth is our sweet spot and we have a wind turbine coming in or solar field, new corporation, whatever, would TIF be beneficial to keep us under that 3% or 6%? Could we use that as a tool and to not manipulate, but maybe manipulate?
Okay, so I think Carla and I are on the same page. The question is, how can TIF be used? How can it, so you might actually look at opportunities, but also threats, because turns out cities can also use TIF. So something to be aware of, because they're dealing with levy consolidation and limitations as well, right? So what we were just discussing, and I wanted to make sure that this was the case, so that TIF valuation is outside of your growth limitation, because you don't, if it's not your TIF, you don't have access, right? So that won't count towards your valuation. Now, the second part of your question was, why wouldn't counties start using more TIF? Because it would be outside of the calculation. Very good point.
Correct. I mean, it could be one of our new best friends if we need to stay below a 3 or 6%.
It very well could. I do have a things to think about slide, so we will dive into that more, but yes, different again, we're dealing with different levies, right, for different purposes, and then your debt service is obviously outside of your general basic and rural basic. Okay, nobody else at the microphone. How are we doing? Exhausted? Are we making progress? Do you feel like you maybe know a little bit more than when you showed up today? You have to at least like nod so I can see you, right? Or maybe you have more questions and you're more confused than when you showed up? Okay, that was a little scary to ask that one. Is everyone good on the few examples that we have? Please, Jill.
Jill Ozuna, Montgomery County. I guess my question is, everybody's grumbling about what we know this terrible situation is, but are there going to be some ways that we can creatively get new revenue to help make up for what we're not going to have beyond this whole levy thing?
That's the intent. What that looks like, we don't know. So the question, and that was a little bit quiet, is the future conversation going to include diversification of revenue? We hope so. And we continue to bring it up, and just a little small humble brag, but if you are putting out, in my line of work, putting out these talking points about diversification, about unfunded mandates, and then all of a sudden legislators start saying it, that's a pretty good thing, right? So I think we are making progress in helping legislators understand that, as I said earlier, I don't think you all run for office to raise taxes on your friends and neighbors, but I think you very much value providing those services that they desire and depend on in your county, right? So that's what we're trying to figure out here is, how do you provide those services? How do you pay for those? How do you start to your point, how do you start to diversify that so it's not just the property taxpayer every time costs increase at the county level? Please.
So did you say the 350 max is still required to use the general supplemental? Yes. So, what? So, okay, so I don't know. Ben obviously gets this better than I do. So if we're at, say, 355, that's not where we're at, but if we were at 355 and this cap brought us down to 348.
Then you're at 348.
That's our new cap, and we can still use supplemental.
Correct.
Okay. I was like, how? That wouldn't work. I'm like, then we got to move stuff over to general, but we can't. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move, let's see. I've actually got one more slide, I guess, on the levy piece, and then we're going to go into some of the other provisions of the bill. So I want to just give you that warning if you came up with a question related to the levy piece, we can always go back to it, but I'm just saying we're going to move on here shortly. The other thing I did want to touch on, and we've talked about this a little bit, is the additions to basic levies. So this is, this would be those items that are specifically listed why you can go over the 350. This previously was a Board of Supervisors decision. This whole section, the 331-426, was repealed, but there is another section that allows for voter approval. So that's what kind of what you might have to navigate if you have things like the natural disasters or the low valuation. And actually, I think that list for the voter approval might be smaller than the Board of Supervisors one. But my point is, now you have to make the case to the voters, right? It's not just at the boardroom figuring out, well, yeah, let's do an extra 4 cents, 5 cents on the levy to pay for X, Y, and Z. It's now, voters, we're asking you to approve us paying for X, Y, and Z. Does this make sense? So one example, and maybe this will make it make more sense. One example is a county told me that they just had the voters approve new jail construction. They're good to go. Their intention was to use the additions to basic levies to pay for the additional staff that they have, the additional expenses of a new facility, And they would have been able to do that. They said, voters, let us borrow to pay for the jail, and then on an annual basis, we'll figure out how to pay to staff it and to keep it running. Now that county likely will have to go to their voters every year and say, okay, we're gonna need this extra dime or 15 cents or whatever it is to pay for the jail that you paid for. Or you can let your investment in the new jail go to waste if we can't staff it, right? Like, these are the tough conversations that you might have to have with your constituents. Good luck. Any questions on this? So the additions are now gone, so that kind of addresses that problem with counties being over 350. So they no longer have the authority to add on unless the voters approve it. And then, in theory, we're working on driving down the levy rate. Okay, let's talk exemptions. So currently, you're aware that certain property owners qualify for the homestead credit. If it's your homestead, you probably qualify. This is a new exemption for 65 plus. So it'll work kind of similarly to the credit, except, as someone pointed out earlier, who gets to pay for the exemptions as opposed to the credits, right? So exemptions are taking that valuation away, and it's absorbed by the locals, where a credit would be extended and the county would be reimbursed for that credit being extended. So now you're absorbing this new exemption. So 65 plus, I think the Department of Management is probably going to talk about the forms and applications. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, except for to just make you aware that it doesn't matter what your valuation's doing, what your levy rate's doing. This is in place, an exemption, and the valuation is going away. Now, what does that look like on a statewide basis? $48 million across all jurisdictions. So statewide counties are typically around a fifth, right? So can we call it $10 million spread over 99 counties? So, you'll probably see it on paper. If I'm being honest, you maybe see it on paper, but you probably won't see the fiscal impact at the county level. Is that making sense? Like, you're not going to figure out how many people to lay off to be able to give a homestead exemption to seniors in your community, is my point, okay? So that will, 2-year phase in, going from $3,250 in the first year, $6,500 moving forward. Ben, please.
My comment on that is, for the vast majority of us, if we're looking at 3 or 4% growth, but we're limited to 2% increase because of the spending, these exemptions actually won't have any effect on us, because they're just going to lower our growth. It's still going to be over the 3%, or still going to be, unless it happens to raise your growth from 3% down to 2.9 because you gave them some extra exemptions. Now all of a sudden you actually can benefit from it.
So I think I understand you. I have not run the numbers on this, but the point was, if you're taking taxable valuation off the top for exemptions, that means you have less when you're calculating your taxable valuation growth, which is then used to get to the levy rate. So when I said it doesn't have anything to do with levy rate, Ben found a way to connect it to that levy rate. That's pretty good. Yeah, your point is well taken, is that valuation would be gone by the time you're calculating your annual growth. Now, after 2 years and it's fully phased in, then you're not going to get that little bonus because it'll already be gone, I guess. Yeah, please.
So the one thing that's kind of interesting and kind of that we need to keep in mind regarding the 65 plus exemption is that first year. So that first year, those who were 65 by the time the law was passed, those who had their homestead by the time the law was passed, but were 65 as of January 1st of 23, they were automatically grandfathered in, right? Now, there was, the Department of Revenue had some varying instructions to the assessor's office, and I know we only have one assessor here, but I think the amount of instruction was very limited as to what they originally gave them, so they were basically on their own to figure out how they were going to collect those applications. Did they need to collect applications? Could they do it over a phone? Did it need to be in person? So there's a lot of differences on how that was implemented. I believe the Department of Revenue really late before the June 30th deadline did come out with a opinion that no matter when those people who were 65 before January 1st and had a homestead on March 15th or whatever that date was, that theirs would be allowed. So that is the only little bitty nuance to this whole thing. Normally they would have to, anybody that had the application in by June 30th, theirs was good, and anybody who wasn't. But there's a small nuance regarding those who were 65 January 1st of 2023 and had a homestead by the time the law passed. So just keep that in mind, auditors, that your assessor may have to have a conversation regarding any of those late filings for that one small group of people.
The other thing I guess I'll add is it was extremely quick this year, from legislation being signed beginning of May to, as Carla said, the June 30th deadline. So I'm expecting some of those issues to get worked out. And I don't think I've said this yet today, but I often do when we're talking about property tax and some of the things that are required of you, which is we want 99 counties doing things the same way at the same time, right? So pretty impossible this year with very little guidance and 2 months to try and figure it out. But luckily, I guess, a lot of the things in the bill have a little bit more lead time, so we can have fun like today, get together and figure out how to make it work, right? Please.
Just a clarification, probably. It was my understanding that 3250 credit went into effect in fiscal 25 in next year's fiscal budget. At least that's the way it was explained to me, that the people that signed up for it earlier this year, that would affect their 23 tax year. And so it should be fiscal 25 and 26, I think.
We're going to look real quick. I was going off of the bill when I put those dates in, but I could have messed it up. So we'll make sure. So the deadline for the application was this year, but there might be, I guess it would be a full 2 years, right? Yeah.
Mid 25, it'll be a year from now that those will start rolling in, which is the fiscal 25 budget, which is based on the 23 value.
Okay. So the questions, the comments, I think what we've established is these numbers are wrong, just subtract 1. So we're going to go fiscal year 25 and 26 for full implementation. Thank you. Great eye. Okay. The other is the military service exemption. So this is currently in place. It's simply expanding it. And this is something that the legislature's proposed nearly every year, as long as I can remember, to try and increase this. And then the conversation in the past has been, you don't fund it, state. Now, they did partially, $692 per thousand. Does anyone know right off statewide average consolidated levy rate? $35 to $40. So the state pays for $6, the locals absorb the rest, right? You see the problem here? Not great news. They got rid of the $692, so we don't have to have that conversation. The locals get to absorb 100% now. So what's that look like? About 7.8 million statewide. Again, this is across all jurisdictions, so for counties, you're probably talking about a fifth of that, right? So not huge, but believe me, the principle of the state continuing to extend benefits and letting locals figure out how to absorb it can wear thin, right? You guys know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
Your year's going to be different there too, fiscal year 25.
Yes. Oh, thank you. So again, just back it up 1 year on the implementation, right? Fiscal year 25. Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns on the two exemptions? So again, the 65 plus is new in addition to the homestead credit and exemption that you get to absorb. And the military goes from 1852 in valuation to 4,000. And again, that's absorbed at the local level. Okay, this one I am going to go kind of fast because I know the department's going to cover this quite a bit this afternoon. So basically, it requires an additional taxpayer mailing, kind of known around the Capitol and elsewhere, I suppose, as the Truth in Taxation. It's basically providing information about budgets, tax rates, and then giving examples of $100,000 residential, $100,000 commercial. And because of the business property tax credit, they pay the same anyway. So back to the earlier comment about do they know what they're doing or why they're, anyway. So the taxpayer statement, in theory, gives the property owner more information about what's going on with their local taxing entities. So, and by the way, this is it all jurisdictions or big three? I forget on this one. Big three, so your counties, cities, and schools, their levy rate information, their budget information will be on this. Now, as you are probably aware, this is in addition to the tax statement, in addition to the assessment notice, but it replaces the max levy. Am I remembering that correctly? The max levy mailing. So I say all that to say, folks are getting a lot of mail with all of these numbers, different times throughout the year, not necessarily lining up with what the Board of Supervisors is doing, but in theory, this gives them more information about what's going on with their local governments and their finances. It's also possible that it confuses a lot of people, more than they're already confused. So I guess the advice would be, in those circumstances, extend grace, know that people are going to be coming in, maybe happy, maybe unhappy, and the timing might be a little unpredictable, but one more mailing, and this is for the taxpayers, so the taxpayers get to pay for the additional mailing. Amanda, please.
So the committee did work, Department of Management. Mike Albers was very helpful. We do have a sample that Department of Management is fine-tuning. Hopefully they will show that today. If not, we will get that sent out so folks know kind of a rough idea of the language and what it will look like.
Please.
Okay, so mine's more of a comment. So we're going to send this notice out in March, correct? Okay.
Yes.
But the budgets aren't going to have to be certified or done until April 30th. So if we have our public hearing that we're still going to have to discuss our budget, we could potentially see a lot more people protesting our budgets because they get this notice and they don't like what they see. That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Yep. Sometimes it is just speaking it into a microphone, making sure that it doesn't make sense when it's louder, and then you're like, yep, that's the way it is. Melvin, I thought you were going to have a question there. Okay. So as I said, I think this will be covered a lot more this afternoon, so I'm going to, if there are no other questions, we'll just go ahead and skip on, or move on. So the first thing, or one of the first good news things that I mentioned was on the bonding authority. And in code right now, there are thresholds, population-based, dollar amount thresholds for when you would need to go ask for voter approval on indebtedness. As I said, one of the first proposals actually decreased And obviously, the intention with that would have been you have to go to your voters for smaller dollar amounts to ask to borrow money. And we came back and said, no, we actually want to do the opposite. Why are we spending taxpayer dollars on, and this is before everything got moved to November, but a special election for bonding over $400,000? Elected supervisors can make a decision on $400,000 or $520,000, right? This is why you guys are elected, why y'all are elected, and what you're entrusted with. You don't need to go to the voters every time you want to borrow $400,000. So that was just a small little mini rant, but 30% increases. So in theory, some business could be conducted without going to a special election for indebtedness. The only other piece that I wanted to touch on there that we haven't covered is on the annual financial report. So the auditor will now include any indebtedness in that annual financial report. And if I recall correctly, right now it's just to the state treasurer on indebtedness, the report. Can anyone?
It's an outstanding obligations report to the state treasurer, so now we just have to include that to the state, or to the program management too. It's not a new report.
Yep.
They already do.
Very good point. So Ben said it's information that you have, a report that you're already doing elsewhere. So it's now, if you're, yeah, we'll just leave it there. It should not be extra, an extra report. It's just included somewhere else. Thank you. Becky, yes, please.
Last slide. Did they change what we, like essential county purpose or essential county needs, did they change that some of those things don't have to go to a vote?
To my knowledge, essential county purpose was not was not addressed.
So if you have a sewer project, let's say, I know we've had one of those, that didn't have to go to a vote, so it doesn't matter what limit of that is, we could essentially do it and bond for it, and that doesn't have to go to a vote. But if it's something that doesn't live in that essential county purpose area, it would have to go to a vote.
Yeah, so if you're talking general county purpose and you're taking on indebtedness, yes. The essential county purpose was not addressed. It was just those dollar amount thresholds.
Perfect, thank you.
And the election date, as I mentioned before, is only November. Lisa.
Good morning, Lucas. Lisa Head in Story County. I got a question on the mailings. So where this one says for each registered voter. So if you've got 4 registered voters in the home, are they going to get 4 pieces of mail, or can you go by household? And under the last one, it said each property owner. So if myself and my husband and I are property owners, does that mean we're going to get 2 pieces of mail, or can it be by household?
Okay. Yep. Carla just confirmed what I was kind of thinking is that'll need to be sorted out. Something about passing a huge bill in the last couple days of session. There are some things that we're going to need to.
I'm just envisioning, property taxpayers saying, well, why is the county sending me 4 pieces of mail to one house that looks like a waste of property tax dollars?
Right. And to my earlier point, they get to pay for it. They're not going to be happy looking at what their tax dollars are spent on when they're looking at 4 pieces of mail to 4 residents of that house, right? So yes, I think that will probably get sorted out, and the difference between the taxpayer statement going to, this one goes to the property owner, and the bonding goes to each registered voter because you're doing you're doing an election for the indebtedness, is the reason that they did those 2 different ways. The universe, it's going to be mostly the same people, but it's not a complete, there's a little bit of a Venn diagram, right? Other questions, comments, concerns? I think we are very close to the end of my slides, and we'll just keep going with questions. So other provisions, and these, actually all 3 of these were asked for by affiliates. So the treasurers have been working on this convenience fee for quite a number of years. This is basically saying, hey, we've got a state service that is being subsidized by property tax because the amount retained by the county when a driver's license is issued is not enough to cover that cost of providing that service. So we're saying if you don't live in the county and you're not a property taxpayer in the county, then you pay a $10 convenience fee for doing those driver's license transactions in a different county. The writing fees, this is not a huge revenue generator at $2 per, but it does get them consistent. This is something the recorders have asked for a while because these three, I call them the toys, your boats, snowmobiles, ATVs, the writing fees were not consistent and it was just an administrative nightmare for what used to be $1.25, right? So they're all uniform now, all $2. And then finally, elimination of a sheriff's fee report that they asked to have removed. Please.
So, say 10 years from now, this has all come to fruit. We've been in this reduction or revenue cap.
Mike, can you introduce
Oh,
yourself?
yeah, I'm Mike
And
Olson.
Is
I'm
this
a
the question
supervisor
that?
from Montgomery County.
Okay.
And
I
I'm
might
down
have
there in that
prepared a little
bottom,
bit.
that bottom row, or the second row, the bottom third, excuse me. So has the state got a plan, the legislature got a plan of what they're going to do with these counties that become insolvent? As they no longer can support secondary roads, can no longer support law enforcement, basically are insolvent, what are they going to do? What are they going to do with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 counties with populations under 5,000 or 6,000? How are they going to do that? Who's going to take care of the bridges? I mean, I know they do, but who's going to take care of this stuff? The other, is Polk County going to pay for southern Iowa? For the bottom 3 or the bottom 2 counties? How's it going to work? Anybody think about this? This reminds me of our exit strategy in Afghanistan. We're going over there. Oh, God, we got to leave. What do? Well, we just leave. So are we going back to Missouri with the bottom two rows of counties? I mean, folks, this is scary. Because this is real, and this is going to become code. So how are we going to do this?
Very good
Thank
question.
you.
And a similar question was asked with the supervisors a month ago. And I said, we are not giving up any counties to Missouri. We love y'all. We're going to keep you in Iowa, okay? So that bottom row, we'll tell Missouri to mind their own business. And those are Iowa counties, right? You make a very good point, though, about, what does this look like long term? What do legislators envision? And after all of that, don't we get back to the same thing that I've said multiple times? We're just trying to figure out how to provide those services that folks desire and or depend on. If the valuation isn't there, what do? Jack up the levy rate? I mean, if you're doing the simple equation of levy rate times valuation equals revenue, that's one thing. But if you're limited on that, you can't do that anymore, then what do? So then it goes to that conversation about how do we diversify? Is it fees covering the cost of providing a service? Is it looking at some state revenues and some sharing of either income tax or sales tax without affecting local option sales tax? Is it attacking or I shouldn't say attacking, is it addressing those things from the state that you're required to do and don't get the financial incentive to do it? It's a whole host of things, I think. But I'm not sure if I won you all over with that. I will say again, within the next 4 years, we will continue to address property tax. So we're going to continue to work on that, I guess is my point. Betty, you thought of one.
Quick question on the Betty Ellis, Wright County Auditor. Elimination of the sheriff's fee report. Is that our sheriff used to do it quarterly, present revenues to the Board of Supervisors, then he went to monthly revenues. Is that what he does and submits to the Board of Supervisors, or is that a different fees report that he does to the state?
So the one that was eliminated is the, the report to the legislature, as far as I,
It's nothing to do with your quarterly report, your monthly report. That's still, they still have to do that.
and if I recall correctly, the fee report is basically just trying to figure out how revenue is generated within the sheriff's office, and then, you know, how much are we asking of property tax, how much is getting covered by the room and board, or, you know, whatever other funding that might come in. And I think the intention in the past was to figure out how funds are coming in and the expenditures, I'm assuming. But the sheriff didn't like to do that and asked to have it removed, and here we are. So, questions or comments before we move on? Okay, things to keep in mind. And this is kind of a catch-all, but your valuation increases might impact your levy rate. We've talked about this quite a bit. So if you're one of those counties over 3% and your levy rate is getting driven down, what is that difference between if you could stay at 350 and the example we used earlier, that 343? So what does that difference look like? Again, we talked about this, that loss of taxable valuation. Ben, you kind of made this bullet point not as important because maybe that doesn't really matter if you're losing the taxable valuation and then you're working on a calculation based on taxable valuation. But again, repeating myself, but those controllable, uncontrollable expenses, alternate funding. Now, in year 1 through 4, are you looking at decreased revenue, but expenditures pretty much stay the same or increase? Are we talking about using carryover balances? Are we talking about that conversation before about moving from general to supplemental, or basic to rural, or what, you know, whatever that might look like? And then future rollbacks. We talked about this briefly, but if last year or 2 years ago it was at 56 and then 54, and we're expecting probably between 47 and 50 next year, the last I heard. What does it look like a year after that, or a year after that, right? Does it continue to drive down, or how does that calculation work? The backfill phase out that we're still all enjoying, speaking of broken promises, I digress. But, you know, as we continue to phase out that state funding, which is a reimbursement for a benefit that they provided, but as that continues to phase out, what does that look like for county revenue? The business property tax credit funding, will that always be there? And future legislative changes, which is what we've been talking about, you know, over the next 4 years at a minimum, we're going to have conversations about what the system looks like long term. The credit is gone, but that's right. Okay, yeah, Carla just mentioned the 2-tier system of the business property tax credit. Okay, just for your information, for fun, this is fiscal year 23. This is revenue, so just under 50%. This is statewide, right? So when we talk about diversification, if half of the revenue is from one source, and that one source happens to be the one thing that supervisors can control or have a little control over, and maybe you have those conversations when constituents or legislators are concerned with the property taxes that they pay, it's also important to remind them, what do those funds go towards? Well, if you look at the two of the larger pieces that get to, or that total about 50%, public safety, roads and bridges. I don't know your constituents, but seems like they'd be willing to pay for that, right? It's probably, you're saying, Lucas, it's the other 50% that they're going to be bringing up to me. But this is just FYI. I don't have anything else to add. Yeah, this is just a rollback that we talked about previously. I'm going to get some water. More questions? Comments, concerns? We didn't answer them all, did we? You're just trying to think of a way to ask it easy enough that I could handle it? So I do say questions, comments, concerns, but let's focus on the last part. A couple people have expressed concerns. We do have a little bit of time if you need to get anything off your chest. Clayton, you going to come through?
What's the chances of the Clayton Ort from Buchanan County of getting some legislation passed? A prerequisite to be a legislature, you'd have to come from county government.
The small problem, Clayton, and I think we've talked about this before, is I don't want to lose you. I want you to stay county officials. I get to hang out with you. You're like always on my good side. Maybe I'm on your good side. If you were to run for the legislature, I don't know. Mark, please.
Yeah, Mark Snell, Warren County. I just want to make sure I'm understanding things correctly, and I want to go back to the rural basic figure in particular. We have a scenario in our particular county where basically the local option sales tax is buying down the rate to a much lower rate. So we're way below. I think we're the fourth lowest in the whole state in terms of our levy rate for rural basic. When it comes to calculating the taxable valuation, we're stuck then, if I understand correctly, using our current levy rate calculation as our base for going forward, correct? So if we're at $1.65 per thousand, which we are, then that's what we're going to be having to use our base for this next year, correct?
Yes.
In calculating our...
Yes, so in the calculation, so I keep using the phrase baked in, right? So your
So in other words,
$1.65.
the taxable valuation that we get from that current, let's use $1.65, that's where we're stuck, that taxable valuation that we currently get from. And so let's say that we get basically 3+% or whatever, so we're into that other category. Then can we only increase that by 2% then, the valuation from that taxable valuation? Because if we're 3% or more, I understand that that's where the problem is. So it's the taxable valuation amount. It doesn't matter what your levy rate is. It's what your currently taxable valuation is, correct?
Let me process. let me make sure I say this right. So, valuations out of your control, right? Over 3%, you're going to be a part of the calculation. Under 3%, you're not. In your case, you're less than $3.95 at $1.65. So, if I recall correctly, if your valuation growth was less than 3%, you would still have all the capacity that you had to go from 165 to 395. As long as you didn't grow over 3%. Now, if you grow over 3%, then you're going to get the calculation that drives 165 even lower.
Oh, right. Okay, and so then the fact that we have the local option sales tax basically buying down doesn't enter into the question at all then?
Because that's by election, right? Your local option was by
That's
election.
correct.
Yep.
This room's way too big. Your local option was by election, so you're held to that for umpteen, how many years you, I don't know what your election stated, but it could be 10 years, it could go on for perpetuity. So yes, so because that election did tie that to your rural basic levy to buy it down, correct, that's where you're going to be.
One of the questions that we've had in our county is how does this affect the libraries in our county and what they're going to receive. And from what I can gather, it doesn't affect them. They're still going to go back to the supervisors. There's still a minimum that the county has to support, and then the maximum is up to the supervisors. Is that correct?
We're six, okay. Okay, say it again, please, I'm sorry. 6 3/4 cents minimum funding for library, on the rural evaluation, the contribution to the libraries. Okay, all libraries in the county? I'm just focused on you, okay. Okay, so, and then of course, the cities are probably contributing as well. So all taxpayers are getting captured. So that was not addressed in the legislation. Now, what could very well happen in boardrooms is that conversation about, we're gonna have less revenue than if we had stayed at 350. Where are we spending? What's the discretionary spending? And it could very well turn into a conversation about, we're way over what's actually required for this contribution or that contribution to this organization or that group. I think those conversations will happen in boardrooms outside of, or I guess to the extent that requirements and what level of funding is actually occurring do not match. Does that make sense? Now we may be in deep trouble if Becky and Ben are plotting over here. Let's go over here, please.
Diane Patrick, Boone County Auditor. And I just wondered, is the rural growth going to be used to determine the calculations for the rural fund, or is that going to be the county-wide growth that's used?
Yeah, very good question. So it was, what valuation are we talking about? So yes, for general basic, you'd be looking at your county-wide. For rural basic, you'd be looking at your unincorporated valuation. Yeah, please. No, you're good, Brian.
Long-term looking down the road, does ISAC have a policy on decoupling residential and ag?
Yes, very good question. The question was decoupling residential and ag. Yes, we do have a long policy statement, and it's, I mean, to oversimplify it, that's what it is why do we couple two, let me back up. So currently, that 3% growth limitation for residential and, in theory, ag, the two are coupled so that if one or the other grows less than 3%, that's the new limitation for both classifications of property. Did I do that right, Carla? Okay. So let's say you have a 3% growth limitation on residential, but ag grows at 2%. Residential capped at the 2% growth, and if you're growing more and more above your threshold, whether it's 3% or a different number, the more growth you have over that, the more the rollback is driven down. When I say you, I mean this, of course, is the statewide numbers, right? So not just your county, but statewide across the classification. So we do have a long-standing policy statement to decouple those. It doesn't make the sense that it did back in the 70s, early 80s when they were coupled because we had residential taking off. It doesn't make sense for them to be coupled anymore, and especially if you've got all of these things that they continue to add with limitations, with everything affecting those properties. It does not, I agree, it does not make sense to have them coupled anymore. Did you have a follow-up since the answer is yes? I would wish me very good luck in the current environment, but please, Ben.
Ben Steinis, Winnebago County Auditor. I was going to just make a comment addressing what this looks like long-term, 10 years from now, insolvency was brought up or something. I think the real question is there are lots of programs that counties offer that are for the benefit of the constituents that aren't actually required. I mean, in our county, whether it's, you know, our public health department is a public health that we run, and we have programs that aren't the required public health programs. Or we have conservation department that isn't actually required at all, but there's a minimum of 26 cents for REAP to qualify for REAP funding, but we're, you know, spending a lot more than that. Or we have a county-run recycling facility, or you know, our recorder's office does passports. Whatever all these programs are, the legislature's basically put it in place that if you're hitting that limit, you're going to have to start cutting some of those services that aren't required, and thereby, you know, affecting your residents. So I think that's part of the point we need to make is, yes, we know that we're spending money, but it's for the benefit of our residents, and that's why we want to continue to have those programs. And so whether we can make that argument to the state and then to the diversification of funding, I mean, a lot of their goal is why do property owners have to pay for all this? So let's look at other, you know, let's go outside the box. Maybe we can have local option fuel tax, and so if you want more money for your roads, you pass something where you can charge money at the pumps. Or we have a local option income tax, or like an income surtax like the schools do, so we can get this funding some other way. Or even if giving us more authority in local option sales tax, so we can collect. If they don't like property taxes, what can we suggest to make this something that they can, you know, get on board with? I know the old argument is that property taxes is what counties like to use because it's very stable and it's easy to calculate. But if that's what they're attacking, let's look at other things. We have to go outside the box.
Thank you. I certainly agree. And, you know, that is part of that ongoing conversation is, and I know I've said it probably a half dozen times now, is I don't think county officials are in the business of trying to collect property taxes just to do it. You know, it doesn't go towards your Christmas party or anything, right? What we're talking about is providing the services that the folks that voted for you are expecting, and how do we do that? Becky.
Okay, so I'm getting creative here in my head. I currently do not use the 395 for rural basic, but you said that supplemental is no longer tied to a levy rate or a cap or whatever on the rural basic side. So I could start moving some of my things that would fit into rural supplemental to that, correct?
Let me back you up. So what's your rural basic right now?
I think it's like 3.6 something.
Okay. So the question was, when can you go into supplemental? You would need to get to your 395 before you could go to rural supplemental.
But if I have more than a 3% growth, I'm not going to ever be at 395.
Yeah.
Son of a gun. Are
Yeah.
you serious?
Right.
I thought I was really clever on that one, no? So, if I were to move things to the rural basic and I get to a max of that growth, I could then go to, does that work?
In theory, that does work. Yeah, it is the same conversation of we might have to be looking at which funds are paying for what, and is that the most appropriate? Or with these new limits, and I'll just say it, the legislature wanting to put limits in place, but supervisors trying to figure out what their constituents want, it might be moving things to supplemental that you didn't
So I'll
in the past.
explain. We currently don't have any of our sheriff's department in rural because of wind turbine growth. That has helped our general basic, well, it's helped our valuation. So our general basic has been capped at 3.5. We've held it there for God knows how long. And so we were able to keep our entire sheriff's department. But now if that's going to be capped, then I'm looking at potentially moving some sheriff's deputies to rural, and I think that you can justify that pretty easily. But then I'm wanting to know with their supplemental, their insurance, their benefits, things like that, can we move that then to the rural supplemental? So
Yep.
I just don't want you to think I'm trying to do anything shady. I'm just,
We wouldn't think that.
thank you.
Yeah, once you get to the 395, then you can move over. Other questions, comments, concerns, limericks? No. I think that is all I have. If you guys don't have questions, I will say, for maybe the last time, the legislature will continue to work on property tax, continue to talk to your legislators. Now, what does that look like? It looks like, hey, I was elected to be handling county business, and you were elected to be handling state business. Okay. You can say what you want, but the point being, let's continue to work on providing those services in the most efficient and effective way for your constituents, respecting their property tax dollars, right? And figuring out how to make it work. But as you continue to talk to your legislators, again, it is so important to make them understand it's not your intention just to have a really great time collecting property tax. It's about the services, and the next steps are diversification of revenue and getting uncontrollable costs back in line. Thank you so much for being here. I hope we answered some questions, and I wanted to make sure to let you know, I'm not sure if Amanda addressed this, but the recording is a joint funding effort from the supervisors and auditors affiliates to make it possible for the recording and then the video to be available on the website for those that couldn't make it, or if you just want to have a bunch of fun over again to rewatch it. So thank you to your affiliates for making that happen, and I think that's it. Thank you so much.